Hi, everyone. Thanks for
Hi.
joining today. Um,
Hi.
all right, so we today are talking about this book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. So as everyone's kind of gathering in, we've got a survey that Zinger's going to put up on the screen right now. Really quick survey.
Mhm.
Would just love to know if anyone has actually read the book, which I don't expect. And then
Mhm.
the other question is if you've ever been on a dysfunctional team, and then how did you know? So I'll just give you a second for that. Um, I see one: poor communication, resentment, toxicity within the team. Definitely understand and can relate, and that is the sign of dysfunction. So thank you for sharing, and we'll be kind of working through some of these as we go through this discussion today. Um, and I'm not surprised that most people answered that they have been on a dysfunctional team. The author, Patrick Lencioni, he describes teamwork as the ultimate competitive advantage because it's so powerful and so rare. Um, there was a friend of the author's who founded a large successful company, and they said if you could get all the people in the organization rowing in the same direction, you could dominate any industry in any market against any competition at any time. Which I think is so true. Patrick Heath says teamwork is elusive and teams are inherently dysfunctional because they're made up of imperfect human beings. But all is not lost. I happen to like a lot of very imperfect human beings. So let's jump in. This author, Patrick Lencioni, he's considered a pioneer of the organizational health movement. So he's authored 13 best-selling books. He and his firm have provided leaders with services to make their organizations more effective and teams cohesive and employees fulfilled. So he really is kind of an expert in this. I have not heard it described as organizational health. Um, and if you do read the book, what I really enjoyed about it is it's set up as a leadership fable. So 90% of the book is a story about this fictional tech company in Silicon Valley. And then the last 10% is devoted to the more academic discussion of the model. And we're going to focus on that today. But just a little bit about this fable. So we're introduced to decision tech, what the circumstances of this company are, the members of the executive team, and their personalities. And then the story takes us along as a new CEO is brought in. Okay, so what's going on with Decision Tech? So they have a more experienced and talented executive team than their competitors. They have more cash than their competitors. They have better core technology and a more powerful board of directors. Yet, in spite of all of that, they are behind two of their competitors in terms of revenue and customer growth. So CEO comes in, she spends 2 weeks doing nothing but observing, and then she opens up her first 2-day leadership offsite by asking the team what the reason is the company is behind. Anyone guess what the new CEO concludes is the reason for this? Well, it's it's that the leadership is not functioning well as a team. So, our fictional CEO, Catherine, aka author Patrick, has concluded that there are 5 reasons why teams are dysfunctional. So, before we talk about those 5 reasons, why am I here and who am I? So, my name is Charity Rieck, and I've been leading people for over 20 years now. My experience has been in operations for several tech companies, starting from large ones. I was at Yahoo for many, many years, and then working my way into smaller startups. And I approach things with a servant leadership philosophy. That's my personal style. I focus on empowering teams, listening deeply, and aligning people and processes to serve customers and employees. And so I will be your guide along this dysfunctional path here. So let's get into the dysfunctions. And he really built this as that pyramid that we saw on the previous slide. So as I was preparing for this book discussion, I was reflecting on my past experiences on various teams, and it was just really interesting to kind of relate some of my experiences to the vocabulary and the way that he describes dysfunctions here in the book. And so I sort of have my own, we'll call it a fable of sorts, that encapsulates a dysfunctional team. So that's not so great in real life, but it's perfect for this book discussion. Um, so my fable, if you will, I was on a leadership team that was made up of co-founders who each had their own functional responsibilities and teams, and then myself, who was hired into the company leading the operations org. And so after a period of very healthy growth and the company coming into its own, working through early chaotic startup environment of just serve the client however you can, keep the lights on, it was at the point where the company was ready to mature. So the leadership team was going through its very first goal setting process. We use the objectives and key results framework. You might have heard it, the OKR framework. It's a very kind of tried and true methodology. You define your objectives, your main goals for the year, and then you define measurable outcomes that indicate progress towards those goals, that objective. And then you develop initiatives or projects that you need to achieve those key results. And then you monitor your progress of your key results and you iterate and so on and so forth. So this was all well and good. And as we were in this process of setting the goals for the year, we were all talking about what they would be and how we would measure them and who would own them. And one of the co-founders made this offhanded comment, and it was sort of this like casual comment, but it hit me really hard. And so, what were the feelings that I had? I was kind of immediately defensive, wanted to be focused on my one goal, not wanting to make a mistake or fail to deliver. So it already set up this like inherent absence of trust amongst this team. And it was really kind of a foundational moment for me. And it really is this foundational dysfunction that Patrick talks about at the base of the pyramid. This absence of trust, this unwillingness to be vulnerable, or this fear of being, wrong or judged. So that is how he describes the first dysfunction, the absence of trust. The next dysfunction is the fear of conflict. So this is really about avoiding healthy debate and just wanting harmony. Have any of you seen this? You're in a discussion that seems intense, and then just as you're maybe about to get somewhere good, it's like shut down, or say let's take it offline. And then maybe it's never even revisited again.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. And then it's like you can't even have the constructive talk you have to have because people are so afraid of the conflict.
Bingo, 1,000%. And yes, I've seen that happen many times. So in my own kind of fable, I'm calling it, this really interesting. We assigned a leader to each goal. And even just in assigning goals and leaders, like conflict was inherently introduced. And so because we did not want to have kind of the discussion to really sort through this, it was just sort of resolved as they're both important. You each work on your own and we'll figure it out later. So it left like this conflict just floating out there instead of actually dealing with the conflict up front and having that healthy debate. So it just sort of lingers, and the issues they remain unspoken, but they're certainly felt. So we're building on our pyramid here, but that can come, especially when you haven't even established that base layer of trust amongst your team. So we're moving our way up the pyramid to the next dysfunction, which is the lack of commitment. And this is where you don't have full buy-in on decisions. Have you been a part of this where a decision's made in one forum, and then later on another team brings it up and handles it a different way from what you thought was an agreed decision, and there's this wishy-washiness and there's not total transparency on decisions? I see nodding.
I know, because
Yeah.
I know that I've been in situations at various companies where leadership would make a decision, but they just wouldn't be clear in their motives for why. And even if I didn't agree with them, if they had at least been transparent and said why, I think I could have gotten on board or felt more comfortable with it. And as long as they let me voice my reservations, but the fact that they just were like, this is going to be, and they just shut it down, it just made me feel not valued. And why would I commit to anyone or anything that doesn't value my opinion? Like, you don't always have to, if listening to my opinion doesn't mean you have to do it. You know, it doesn't mean that that's what you have to do, but just listening and being like, oh, I hear what you think. That's really interesting, but I think this is the way we're going to go, and here's why. But thank you for speaking up and sharing your other thoughts. We like to have a diversity of thought and opinion, and any place that doesn't do that, I always feel like that just speaks to insecurity at the top of the system. But I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're right. I
Yeah.
mean, and you're speaking to one of the solutions here, which we'll get to. So, thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, I mean, in my personal story, we never had that healthy debate or discussion on robust goals. Again, fear of conflict, and this conflict cloud is very hard to make decisions. We didn't have, a singular goal that everyone had arrived at together and had debated and heard pros and cons, and it helps clear up all of those conflicts and that the decision making process.
Yeah, see, that's where I feel like companies should take this part offline. Like, you should take like something that a lot of people need, that it needs to be like a listening like meeting. I think one, I think there should be such a thing as a listening meeting. And then two, I think it should happen at lunch, dinner, or a bar where people kind of have their guard down more, and it's more communal or discussion based, and it's in
Yeah, well,
person. I'm like such a fan of
mhm.
in person these days after having worked in remote for so long. I'm like, not in person all the way. Everyone's energy changes. Preferably there's a skee ball machine somewhere.
Skee ball solves everything.
I know skee ball's
It,
the answer.
it all, but you're right, because you actually, I think, feel more trust in those scenarios. Like we took going back to the first one, you feel that like you can be in a way more vulnerable because you are in a different setting. You are, enjoying, interesting discussions on a more personal level in a way. And so you build up that trust, which makes you feel more empowered to, you know, voice your opinion, to state, to have a healthy conversation. So you are playing right into this. And let's move on to our fourth dysfunction. So this is the avoidance of accountability, and I love this picture here. It's like, it's not my problem, earmuffs, everything's okay. And this is really just, again, a marker for poor leadership and poor teamwork. I know that I've, felt like this, and I'm sure acted like this, like I've got my blinders on, I'm doing my own thing. If you don't feel the trust of that leadership, like we're in it together, you just kind of want to stay in your own swim lane. And if you're seeing poor behavior or things on other teams, again, you don't feel, empowered to bring it up, or you don't feel, again, committed to the overall good of the company. You just want to kind of avoid that accountability elsewhere, not call out your peers, and just kind of more focus on your own thing. But if you had that teamwork, and you had that trust, this is something that you could fix and work on together as a team. I love that one.
Same.
Okay. Yes. And moving on to our last dysfunction, this is the inattention to results. And so this manifests itself as like focusing on that personal success. It's the lack of the collective accountability, the goals not being aligned or tracked. So I'm sure everyone here's heard of Michael Jordan from the Bulls. The greatest basketball player of all time. And if you disagree with me, we can have a discussion about that afterwards offline. And we will have healthy conflict and debate over it. But he is the greatest basketball player of all time. So Michael Jordan, he started his early career under a coach by the name of Doug Collins. And this was before he really became Michael Jordan in the Bulls. And so someone asked him, a reporter asked him at one point, like, would they have won a ring or the title under Doug Collins? And Michael Jordan said that, with the talent that we had, we were progressing, we were moving in that direction. But when Phil Jackson took over as the coach, he gave us a system to work within. For any basketball fans, it's the triangle offensive system. And he said under Doug Collins, it was a lot of individual talent. And Doug used that talent very very well. Doug was relying on the individual players on the team, and then Phil Jackson came and molded the team around a structured offensive system. So Michael Jordan was building up all his stats under Doug Collins. He had all these triple doubles and how many points was he getting, but the team wasn't winning titles. So with Phil Jackson, the goal was the title. And if you know, did they win? Yes, they won 6 of them. And so for my story, the company was very much in the Doug Collins era. It was individual players on the court at the same time, focusing on their own thing. And then, the team really comes together when they have that primary goal. So the Bulls winning the NBA title, operating under a system that had everyone working together. So how do we get to the Phil Jackson triangle offense, 6 NBA titles, and overcome a dysfunctional individual focused team? So before we talk about our solutions, we'll just take another quick survey here. 2 quick questions. You could answer those. Okay, thank you for the results. Okay, I see some folks said that they have been on successful teams. That's great. And the team was incredible. They wanted to work together as a team. I love that answer. They wanted to work as a team. I love that because it just hits right at the heart of kind of the mindset needed going into what could be, a difficult year, difficult goals, but if you are approaching it with that mentality, I love that answer.
And I don't know if this fits into it, but I really believe in getting to know your team and recognizing their strengths, and then using those strengths to figure out what role they fit into. But then when you do that, I felt like then the team really actually would admire each other, because they would see like how well someone could do something. And so it was just interesting when you move someone into their like really good zone, and then everyone just kind of respected and got in line. I'm trying to think of how that fits into all this, but I think it does. I just,
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful expression of even of leadership, right? Because you're finding those skills and you're letting them flourish, you're empowering them, and you're giving them your trust in a way to say, do your thing. So I love that, and that sort of like builds almost like a little community then, seeing how other people are flourishing and sharing, unique strengths and talents. And
so many people are so talented. I mean, that's the one thing I took away is like, you'd be like, oh, this person's not that great at their job. And then and then you'd get to know them, be like, oh my God, but they're amazing at this other thing. Why are they in this job? What are they doing here?
But and that's great, because then you can help move them to somewhere else that they'd be more successful. I love it. Love it. Great. Okay. Let's get into our solutions then. So we're going to build our way back through the pyramid of the solutions attacking our dysfunctions. So let's go back to our absence of trust. So how do we avoid the absence of trust? Will you foster trust? Okay, I know that sounds easy, but it really has to become a discipline. It has to be modeled from the top. Have you ever been on a team where people present themselves as the smartest person in the room? Yeah. Do you like being on a team with that person? No. So Patrick describes this as vulnerability-based trust. I think this one's so important. If you're leading a team, as a leader, you have to set that environment where team members feel safe to raise things and express themselves. And you, as a leader, have to be the first to show vulnerability. I think through my experiences with other leaders, I've kind of crafted my own leadership style, the servant leadership mentality. And I want my team members to feel, comfortable. It's very easy for me to be vulnerable because I am not the best at everything. And there are other experts within my team. And I think, Zinger hit upon this perfectly. When there are other people who are really good at things, celebrating that, it drives the dynamic in a much more positive way forward. So Patrick Lencioni, he suggests using exercises like personal histories, which is really just kind of sharing, not going into your social security numbers, but really sharing more about how you grew up, what schools you went to, as a way to share information and connect on a deeper level, right? It's like going to skee ball. You're finding a way to connect about other things. I like to do this organically on a small scale in almost every team meeting, asking how people's weekends were, if they did anything fun or if they're traveling. And you'll notice that when you've created a strong dynamic, people will respond easily. Like the conversation will easily flow. People will volunteer. They'll want to tell you about the crazy thing from over the weekend. And that's when you've created a good dynamic. When it seems forced or no one answers, that you've probably been there when like dead silence, then you've got more work to do. But this, I think, is I don't want to say it's the easiest. It's not, but it's being human. Be human, be professional, but be human. And that is the kind of this vulnerability-based trust that Patrick tries to instill in leaders. Okay, so let's talk about the fear of conflict. So overcoming the fear of conflict is to engage in productive conflict. Again, okay, easily said. I think this one is maybe the hardest one. I probably would have spoken out more without the fear of being attacked or judged or fired. So I think, again, this one really does come from the top. If a leader invites conversation, but then they have to hold the conversation in check, make sure that they're focused on the results of the company or the processes or the products. Keep the company focus at the heart of the discussion and results at the heart of the discussion. And then give everyone a voice. If you have that voice and you're able to kind of express your point of view, it gives a strong leader the opportunity to hear it. And the role of the leader here is to really remind everyone that this is actually productive. It may feel uncomfortable in the moment, but it will lead to better outcomes. The strong leader is going to take all of the information in, hear constructive debate, probably hear something new, and make a better decision. And that is better for the company and for the team. The author also suggests here using what he calls a miner of conflict. So miner in the sense of like coal miner, like digging it out, as using a team member, someone who tends to avoid conflict, and asking them to assume the role of the miner of conflict and extract those buried disagreements and shed light on them. So, calling out the sensitive issues, forcing the team to work through them, but reminding everyone that even though, right, some people like to avoid, they want to avoid this, they don't have time for it, they're not efficient, but in the long run, the time that you spend here on these discussions actually ends up being more efficient in the long run. So I always find that this one's a little, if the trust is set, then it should feel like a good conversation. But if the trust is not set, it's going to feel uncomfortable.
I like how number 3 is avoid avoidance.
Oh. Yes, well said. Avoid. I love that. Well said. All right. So let's go back to our lack of commitment. And how do we actually ensure commitment? So again, we're starting to see how these all layer on top of each other. But if you had that healthy debate, and everyone was involved in the discussion and they hear other points of view, and then when that decision comes down, it doesn't feel like it's just handed to them. Like Zinger was talking about, it just feels like sometimes something's dropped from on high, and then you don't feel connected or committed to it at all because you hadn't been able to kind of voice your opinion. Or has anyone ever had this scenario where you're in a meeting and a decision's made and one team carries it back and their team starts operating under the new protocol and another team hasn't been communicated to or hasn't heard the decision, and so then you have teams still operating under different protocols? So it's really important here that when you do get a decision, that you cascade those decisions down to all of your team members. And it's a really good discipline to get into. So if a decision needs to be cascaded, don't leave that decision meeting until you say, when are you talking to your team? I'm doing it Monday. Oh, you're doing it Wednesday. Okay, so we know that by the end of the week, everyone will have the new decision and be operating under the same kind of protocols. You should hold your other peer leaders accountable for doing that cascading of the decision, because otherwise you have no commitment. You have no commitment if there is no cascading of decisions. The other tactic that Patrick, the author, suggests here is setting deadlines for decisions and creating some urgency. So, I wouldn't advise making deadlines, artificially too quick and creating unwarranted stress, but be concrete about it. I know we've been talking about this for some time. I'd like to set a decision for a deadline for wrapping up a decision by the end of the month so we can move on to other things. And then asking, do I have everyone's commitment that they're going to bring their analysis or their points of view to the next meeting in anticipation of a decision? And then actually follow through on that, creating this little, call it what you will, a false sense of urgency, but it really kind of pushes you to then getting a decision and moving forward and not getting stuck in this lack of, analysis paralysis or wishy-washiness.
Charity, I like how you called it a point of view, analysis and point of view. And I think that is the perfect way to look at it, possibly to get through that conflict solution. One of the additional conflict solutions is probably that. I think that you really caught on to something where, like, instead of saying, like, when someone gets into a moment of conflict, maybe being like, hey, let's just talk, let's stop a moment and talk about everyone's point of view. Somehow that seems to take the heat out of it and allows people to also communicate and share their point of view without having to feel super aggressive or having a lot of tension in the moment. Does this make sense what I'm trying to say here? I feel like that might
Yes.
actually be a really great strategy.
Yes, yes,
I
yes.
like that.
Yeah, yeah. And you also hit on something, maybe we even talked about this, but the like no drama, the no drama, taking the drama out of everything. Yeah, thank you for that, Zinger. Okay.
Thank
All right.
you. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're the one that made me think of it.
Okay, so remember my favorite guy, blocking it all out, like avoiding accountability. Okay, well, how do we hold each other accountable? And this can be tough too, to hold your peers accountable, right? Because you're sort of on the same playing field. But if you go back again to the tone set by the leader, making sure everyone's bought into the goals, well, then you're starting to create that culture where it's okay to ask your peer about their commitment. But it's only going to feel productive if that feeling of trust has been built. And if it goes into personal attacks, then it's gone wrong. This can actually be really healthy things can come out of this if you hold your peers accountable, right? Like if you notice a goal slipping on another team, but you say, what can I or my team do to move this in the right direction? Then again, maybe you can find ways to work together towards that ultimate goal. So it opens up a pathway to working towards the goal. And it's kind of taking that attack out of it, but it's more solution oriented. So might feel uncomfortable in the moment to hold your peer accountable. But if you're saying, what can I or my team do to help? Then you're moving in that commitment towards that ultimate goal.
I think that's a great way to look at it, because that is scary, holding your peers accountable, because you don't know if someone's going to get really offended. You're going to hurt feelings. Someone's going to do something vengeful in return or retaliatory because now they're hurt and they're mad and they feel like it's unfair. So I think the fact that if you feel like another team isn't meeting their goals, offering to help while you're like initiating that conversation, I feel like that's amazing.
Yeah.
I really like that a lot, Charity. That's really great.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Love it. Love it. All right. So our last solution here, our solution for the inattention to results. Okay, so this is our Phil Jackson NBA title moment. We're focusing on collective results for the company, not focusing on individual accolades for one person or one team. It goes back to having goals, again, focused on the overall team success that you're able to measure. Do you all have goals at your company? Do you have goals? Are they stated? Are they
Yes.
measured?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, I think also it can be easy for some teams to get lost in the goals if they don't feel connected to them or they don't know where their place is. I think back to my early days at a large company. You know, in a large company, they have these goals, but you feel like so disconnected to it. But or like I was on a risk prevention team back early in my career, and for a revenue goal, how could I motivate my team whose job was to like prevent things from bad things from happening? How does that enable sales or revenue? And you have to like flip the script, shift the mindset, and really do the thinking of why is your team here? Why are they connected to that goal? And for the example of being on a risk prevention team, it's if my team was not preventing bad things from happening, sellers would pull back their spend and there would be less spend without them. So by them doing a good job and making sure the bad actors weren't there and bad things weren't happening, it created confidence in the product, in the system, so that then there would be more spend on the platform. Or, you know, think about an IT team who might be like, well, I'm not connected to a revenue goal. What do I have to do? But if you flip the script and really think about, well, no, if you have to empower everyone to get up and running on their computer so they can go out and sell, you can get them up and running in 2 days instead of 3 days. It's another day of selling. If you can make sure that people aren't having, you know, problems on their computers that are taking them offline for half a day, and you know they're back up and running in 20 minutes, you're helping them to work towards that revenue goal. So I think when everyone finds the way to feel that they are connected to that goal, even if it is a little bit of an indirect path, you are again tied into the success of the company and the results. Um, and you know, this is the fun one here because here you can actually celebrate like team accomplishments. You know, throw a party, send out some company swag, or you know, buy everyone coffee. So this get everyone like reinvigorated, reacquainted with the company's success. So this one I think is a great one because it gets everyone bought in and it's fun. So we have built our way back up through the pyramid with solutions. So what happened to decision tech? Well, our CEO Catherine, she made some executive changes of the leadership, so that the team could start building trust with some new personnel. They started having productive meetings, and they arrived at collective goals. And again, it's collective goals. They held each other responsible. They called each other out, and always brought the discussion back to results. And it was total world domination, and everyone became best friends. Well, close, but actually, over the course of the next year, Decision Tech, they grew their sales dramatically. They met their revenue goals 3 out of 4 quarters. They moved into a tie for the #1 position in the industry, but still hadn't separated themselves from their chief competition. So all in all, like tremendous progress. The thing to remember here also is that there's no silver bullet, right? Teamwork isn't easy. Remember, we said it was elusive and rare. It doesn't just happen overnight. But when you get those pieces and you get everyone starting to row in the same direction, that's when the magic starts to happen. So hopefully you now know what trips teams up so easily, and you have some tools as leaders to help like work through it. So go and read the book if you want to read the parable. We've got links here to Patrick Lencioni's website, and he has a free handout. And hopefully you take some of these tactics and implement them within teams that you lead. Any questions?
Thank you, Charity. That's amazing. That's super helpful. This has been fantastic. This has been a great overview of the book. Thank you for sharing your personal experiences. This has been incredible. I feel like if I would like to start off the Q&A by asking a question, but how do you feel like having read this? When you read this, were you like, oh, I totally recognize this framework in various parts of my career? Was there anything new that struck you or anything that you're like, oh, I'm definitely gonna pay more attention to this in the future?
I think yeah, that's a great question. I think it was almost like seeing it written on paper in a way. was like, oh yeah, I have definitely had these feelings in these moments, all, in different companies with different leadership teams. But it was like really seeing it on paper and like baked into a pyramid. I'm like, oh yeah, there's a reason why things don't work or didn't work well or didn't feel great. And then I reflect back on teams that actually I did function well, and why was it? And to me, a lot of times it does come back to the trust. And I think trust is that ultimate building base of the pyramid, because when you have that trust, again, you can go back and
Mm.
forth, you can have it, call each
Mhm.
other out, you
Mhm.
feel comfortable in your skin, you feel comfortable being there, and that's really
Mhm.
when the best parts come out. And it comes back, then I don't think you can get that trust without really having one, it modeled for you. But sometimes there
Mhm.
are just personalities that lend each other, like you said, people wanting to work together. Sometimes there are just personalities that, when are brought together, and in
Mhm.
the right environment, they work well together. Sometimes it does go back to different personalities.
Mhm.
Patrick talks, about taking the like the Myers-Briggs personality tests, and that's one of his other solutions, is trying to like
Mhm.
peel back the layers of other people. And sometimes
Fascinating.
it is just, sometimes it is just what it is.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get good leaders who try to push through that, and
Yeah.
sometimes you get leaders who just like almost disconnect in a way.
Mhm.
So I think when I reflect upon all my experiences, if can build that trust or have that trust there, um, it's been a much better experience and better things have happened.
That's amazing, Charity. That's awesome. Um, that's a great answer. Do you feel like which one of those dysfunctions, if someone was a new manager, if you were coaching a new manager, which one of those five dysfunctions would you tell them is the fundamentally most important one?
I think if I look at it as the pyramid, I think that that's why that pyramid is kind of stacked that way. If
Hmm.
you set that base layer of comfort, understanding your peers, getting to know them almost on a personal level,
Hmm.
um, building that like camaraderie
Hmm.
and feeling of connectedness, and we're in it together, then
Hmm.
the other things will flow from there. So I
Hmm.
would, and again, I said it before, but that base layer of trust, it comes with being human, that like
Hmm.
vulnerability based trust. So be human with your team. Um,
Hmm.
and then you can start to build from there. So for a new manager, that's where I'd say to focus. I think new managers kind of tend to come at it, they don't quite know what they're doing, so they almost have a posture of I do know what I'm doing,
Hmm.
and almost kind of overreaching on like
Hmm.
their style in a
Hmm.
way, because they want to
Hmm.
appear authoritarian, or they want to
Yeah.
appear in charge.
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes a mistake that new managers, just it just happens.
Because it's scary when you're promoted to a new role. I feel like this must just be common to everyone is they're like, I want to prove that they didn't make the wrong decision in hiring me. And I wish that maybe the hiring people would say, hey, we know we expect that the first month or two are going to be bumpy. Here's what we hope happens at the end of 2 months. It's okay if you don't have all the answers, just ask. You can be totally transparent with your team, for the things you don't know and ask for their lean on their expertise. I wish that that was
Yeah.
more part of like a cultural setting point, I guess, because I've been in so many positions that I'm like, it's just you may not know the answer and someone's coming to you and you don't want to let the direct report coming to you down, but then you don't want your boss to think you're incompetent. It's really scary.
Yeah, yes. I love how you like position that and would almost like build that into okay, here's the keys to new
Yes.
managers. I think that's a
Yes.
great point to build
Yeah.
in like letting them
Yes.
develop their style and get into the role.
Well, it's like parenting. You don't know until you do it. Like you really don't understand what it takes or what is going on or how to work it out until you do it. And so you're not going to. I remember when I was a teacher, when I first started teaching this community college, people wrote the nastiest reviews of me online, but it was so fair because it was like my first year or two. And actually, the feedback was super helpful, but it was the only place that I got the real feedback because it was anonymous. So, whereas the feedback, and they didn't ask for feedback for every class, unfortunately, they only asked like one class once a year for feedback. But that's why I think I almost think anonymous feedback is vitally important too. Maybe to keep those 5 dysfunctions in check, or
Yeah.
maybe even so you can kind of rate and be like, okay, along the 5 things that could lead to dysfunction in my team, this is where we're scaling. This is getting in the red zone. I need to address it. Almost like getting couple tests to gauge like your disease. I feel like just like an ongoing checking in. I guess that, yeah, I don't know. There's just
Yeah.
we need humans back in the office, Charity. It's this, I blame it on remote work.
I know. I know.
I
Well,
do.
he also talks
And
about
I'm
in the
gonna
book
call I'm
about,
gonna call it scene. So if you want to like just say, hey, thanks for coming or whatever, or good luck, and then we
right.
can actually have like a real convo
Yeah.
for a couple
Yeah.
minutes, that's totally fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for bringing your personal stories. I really
thank
appreciated
you.
hearing from all of you.
Thank
Hopefully you have
you.
some good tips here and tactics to build into your own style. And feel free to reach out to us at Automatic Leader for any other courses that you'd like in the future. And we'll see you on the next one.